On a frozen February night in 1997, 5 seniors from Stillwater County High drove out to the lake to celebrate their last winter break together. By morning, their truck was found half buried in ice. Doors open, engine running, headlights still on. No one inside, no footprints, no signs of struggle, just tire tracks ending at the edge of the frozen lake. 23 years later, the ice is melting again. And so are the lies. If you're drawn to the strange, the unsolved, and the forgotten, hit subscribe, because some stories don't end when the snow melts. The sheriff remembered the sound before he remembered the sight. It was a hollow, rhythmic creak, the sound of thawing ice under the weight of something too heavy to move. The call had come in just after dawn on February 16, 1997. A fisherman, up before sunrise, had found a Ford F-150 idling on the frozen lake. Headlights cutting through mist, exhaust bleeding into the white air. Sheriff Calvin Dorr had seen accidents on Stillwater Lake before. Hunters too drunk to judge the ice thickness. Kids joyriding past curfew. But this felt wrong the moment he stepped out of the cruiser. The cold was bone deep, the kind of cold that silenced sound. He approached slowly, boots crunching over thin ice. The truck door hung open. Inside, an empty six-pack, 1 Polaroid photograph, and a single mitten. The radio hummed with static. 5 names, 5 families, all gone between midnight and 3 a.m. Case file number 97-214, missing persons. Mackenzie Lowell, Aaron Holt, Clara Riggs, twins Jonah and Matthew Thorne. In the following days, search crews combed every mile of shoreline. Helicopters swept the lake. Divers found nothing but silt and beer cans. By March, Stillwater County had stopped asking questions out loud. But the silence never left. And 23 years later, when the drought hit and the lake began to recede, Sheriff Dorr, now retired, was the first to hear the sound again. This time, it wasn't ice breaking. It was the ground giving something back. July 2020. The air over Stillwater County shimmered with heat, an unfamiliar thing in a town used to snow. The lake, once a mirror of ice, had shrunk to half its size, exposing layers of gray silt and long-buried secrets. Rachel Lowry adjusted her camera tripod and pressed record. She wasn't supposed to be there. Technically, the county had declared the area unstable terrain, but she'd driven 9 hours from Minneapolis and wasn't leaving without a story. A podcast producer with a growing channel called Frozen Truths, Rachel specialized in cold cases. The Stillwater 5 had haunted her since she was 16. Now 32, she stood on the cracked shoreline where the truck had once been found. The lake was silent except for the whisper of reeds and the buzz of distant power lines. July 12, 2020, she said into the mic. Stillwater Lake. 23 years since the disappearance of 5 local teenagers. The drought has exposed new ground. Locals say the lake's finally giving something back. She let the recorder hum for ambient sound. It was her ritual. Capture the silence before breaking it. Behind her, a pickup rumbled up the gravel road. Sheriff's emblem on the door. A man stepped out, broad-shouldered, gray hair, face lined by years and weather. "Private property, ma'am," he said. His voice was quiet but firm. "Technically county land," she replied without turning. "And technically public record." He studied her for a long moment. "You're one of those internet reporters?" "Documentarian," she corrected. "Rachel Lowry." Recognition flickered in his eyes. "I know that name. You did the piece on the Granite Falls disappearance." "That's me," he sighed. "Sheriff Dorr. Retired. But I still keep an eye on this place." Rachel lowered her camera slightly. "You were the first on scene, weren't you?" He didn't answer, just glanced toward the lake. "You shouldn't be standing there. That mud'll swallow you whole if you're not careful." "I'll take my chances." Something metallic glinted near the waterline. Rachel moved closer, kneeling. At first, it looked like driftwood. Then she brushed away the silt. It was a license plate, rusted but legible. 97F-213. The sheriff froze. "That's the Thorne boy's plate." Rachel turned, voice low. "You're sure?" "I never forget case numbers." The discovery pulled the air out of the day. For 23 years, that truck had been the only trace of the 5 kids. Now something had shifted, literally risen from the lake bed. The sheriff exhaled. "They told me once that lake doesn't keep secrets, just takes its time." That night, Rachel checked into the only motel in town, a 1-story building with humming neon and a vending machine that $8. She uploaded the footage, labeled it Episode 1, The Stillwater 5, and watched the file bar crawl toward 100%. Outside, thunder rolled over the prairie. Inside, a mosquito buzzed against the motel lamp. And in the dark water beyond the hills, the lake breathed again, slow, patient, ancient. Rachel didn't know it yet, but she just woke in something that had been waiting a very long time. Morning broke heavy and humid over Stillwater County. A gray haze hung low over the lake, where fog and dust had become indistinguishable from each other. The drought had stripped everything bare, even the illusions. Sheriff Calvin Dorr hadn't slept. He sat at his kitchen table in a faded undershirt, mug of black coffee cooling beside an open file box. The papers inside were the color of old bones. Case file number 97-214. He'd told himself for years that he'd burned the last copy. He'd lied. The doorbell rang just after 7. Dorr didn't move right away. He knew who it would be. Only one person had a reason to come this early. Rachel Lowry stood on his porch, wearing yesterday's jacket and a look of quiet determination. Her camera bag hung from her shoulder like an anchor. "Sorry to bother you," she said. "I know it's early." "You're not sorry," he replied, opening the screen door. "You've got that look. The one reporters get when they smell a story." She smiled slightly. "You kept the files." Dorr's eyes narrowed. "How would you?" "I saw the box in your truck yesterday," she said. "I used to work in evidence review. I know what old county boxes look like." He sighed, motioning her inside. The house smelled faintly of cedar and old coffee. Photos lined the hallway. Fishing trophies. A wife who died in 2008. A daughter he never talked about. Rachel set up her recorder on the table. "Off the record, if you want." "Nothing's off the record once you hit that button," he muttered, then sat across from her. "Ask your questions." She clicked the recorder. "When you arrived at the lake in 97, what did you see?" Dorr looked past her, toward the window. "Nothing." "That's what haunted me. The truck was still running, lights on, doors open, but the snow was untouched except for one set of prints, leading out onto the ice, then stopping halfway. The wind should have covered them, but it didn't. It was like the storm knew not to. Rachel wrote notes fast. No signs of violence, struggle. He shook his head. No blood, no drag marks. Just absence. "Did you know the victims personally?" "Everyone knew everyone in Stillwater," Dorr said quietly. "Aaron Holt worked part-time at the feed store. The Thorne twins played football. Clara Riggs babysat my niece. Mackenzie Lowell." He stopped himself. "She was the only one I didn't know well. New to town. Moved here 6 months before the disappearance." Rachel looked up. "Any connection between them?" "Closest thing they had in common was youth and boredom," he said. "And that lake." He stood, poured himself another cup of coffee, then stared out the window again. There was one thing that never made it into the report. Rachel straightened. "What's that?" "When we pulled the truck out of the ice, the cassette deck was still running. Tape was warped, but you could hear it. A song playing on loop. Riders on the Storm. Jim Morrison kept rewinding itself. We couldn't explain that either. He handed her a thin envelope, the type that disintegrates at the edges from decades of fingerprints. Inside were 5 Polaroids, the same kind that had been found in the truck. The photos showed the group at the lake, laughing, a bonfire burning behind them. One photo was different. In it, Mackenzie wasn't smiling. She was looking past the camera, into the dark beyond the fire. Rachel frowned. Who took this? That's the thing, Dorr said. We never found the camera. Just the film. The air conditioner rattled, filling the silence between them. I think I can help, Rachel said finally. There's tech now. Photo restoration, digital enhancement. If we can scan these, maybe we'll see something that wasn't visible before. Dorr gave a tired half-smile. You think time hides clues instead of erasing them? I think time changes how we look at things. He nodded slowly. All right, but if you're going to dig, you'd better be ready for what's buried. Stillwater doesn't like outsiders stirring up ghosts. Rachel stood, gathering the photos carefully. Then it's a good thing I'm not afraid of ghosts. As she walked down the gravel drive, the morning sun broke through the haze, glinting off the lake in the distance, or what was left of it. Behind her, Dorr stepped out onto the porch. He watched her car drive away, then whispered to no one, "She's not ready." He didn't mean Rachel. He meant the lake. That afternoon, workers from the county water board arrived with heavy equipment to mark new shoreline boundaries. One of them radioed in after finding something strange, a line of sun-bleached wood buried under the silt, forming a near-perfect rectangle. By dusk, they realized it wasn't driftwood. It was the roof of a cabin, one that hadn't been on any map since 1972, and when they pried open what was left of the door, they found something inside. A shoe, half buried in mud. A woman's shoe, size 7. Rachel would get the call before midnight, and for the first time in 23 years, Stillwater County would stop pretending nothing ever happened. The call came at 11:47 p.m. Rachel was half asleep in the motel, her laptop still open, the room humming with the static whine of the air conditioner. The sheriff's number glowed on her phone. "Lowry," Dorr said. His voice was tight. "We've found something." She sat up fast. "At the lake? Old structure. Used to be a hunting cabin. Wasn't on any county record. You'll want to see this for yourself." By the time Rachel reached the site, floodlights cut white arcs across the shrunken shoreline. The lake looked alien now, its shrunken body exposing skeletal trees and the glint of submerged debris. Men in orange vests stood ankle-deep in mud, their boots sinking into decades of silence. The cabin was half swallowed by sediment. Its roof caved in, walls bowed outward like lungs exhaling their final breath. The air smelled of silt and rust, and something faintly organic. Dorr met her at the perimeter tape. "We found a shoe inside. Small, looks like a woman's, size 7. Rachel nodded. "One of the victims? Maybe. Maybe not." He motioned for her to follow. Inside the cabin, spotlights revealed warped furniture. Table, cot, the remains of a wood stove collapsed under its own weight. In one corner, a trunk sat wedged beneath debris. The padlock had rusted through. A deputy lifted the lid with gloved hands. Inside lay bundles of papers, waterlogged and fused together, and a small tin box. When they opened the tin, Rachel leaned closer. Inside was a stack of Polaroids. Most had dissolved into smears of color, but one was still legible. A woman standing in front of the same cabin, wearing a flannel jacket and holding what looked like a shotgun. Her face was indistinct, blurred by exposure, but behind her, faintly visible, were 5 shapes. Figures. Teenagers. Rachel's pulse quickened. "This photo's from the 90s. Look at their clothes. Denim jackets, varsity logos." Dorr frowned. "So, what's your theory? They came out here before the lake swallowed it? Or someone brought them here?" The air outside thickened with mosquitoes and murmurs. A deputy marked the photo bag, evidence number 24A. Rachel stepped outside to breathe. The lake stretched out under the moonlight, smaller than she remembered from childhood TV clips of the case. "Who owned the property before it flooded?" she asked. Dorr rubbed his temple. "Officially? No one. But the last structure recorded near this section belonged to the Fenwick family. Left town in 1973. Cabin went underwater when the dam expanded the reservoir. Nobody's mentioned them in years." "Fenwick," Rachel repeated, tasting the name. "Any connection to the missing kids?" Dorr hesitated. "None that I know of. But I'll tell you this. Mackenzie Lowell rented a room from an old woman on Fenwick Road before she disappeared." Rachel's head snapped up. "You're serious?" "Dead serious." A shout came from inside the cabin. Two deputies emerged carrying another object wrapped in a tarp. The outline suggested something wooden, flat, rectangular. When they unwrapped it, everyone fell silent. It was a door, a trap door, pulled from the cabin's collapsed floor. The underside was covered in carved initials: Aaron H. Jonah T. Matt T. Clara R. Kenzie. Dorr's jaw tightened. "They were here," Rachel whispered. "So why didn't anyone know this cabin existed?" "Because it was supposed to be 50 feet underwater." The next morning, news spread through Stillwater like wildfire. For the first time in decades, people stopped avoiding the lake's name. At Rosie's Diner, farmers and teachers spoke in hushed tones about the Fenwick place, about the lake swallowing sin, about how ghosts were patient things. Rachel sat in a booth near the window, sipping black coffee, notebook open. She watched condensation slide down the glass as storm clouds gathered in the distance. "Careful asking around," Dorr told her from across the table. "Stillwater folks remember things differently, and they don't like when outsiders remind them." "I'm not leaving until I know what happened," she said. He studied her for a long moment. "You remind me of my daughter. She used to think truth was something you dig for. Now she knows. Sometimes it's something you drown in." Before Rachel could answer, her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She hesitated, then answered. A voice crackled through static. "You shouldn't have gone to the lake." "Who is this?" The voice was calm, older. "You're looking in the wrong decade." The line went dead. Rachel stared at the screen. "Wrong decade," she murmured. Then it hit her. The Fenwicks left in 1973. The lake was expanded in 74. What if the Stillwater Five weren't the first to vanish? She closed her notebook and looked out the diner window. Thunder rolled over the hills, and the lake shimmered like a wounded animal. That night, while lightning pulsed over the dark horizon, Dorr returned alone to the cabin site. Rain had begun to fall, muddying footprints and pooling in the hollow where the trapdoor had been found. He crouched near the hole, flashlight beam trembling in his old hands. Something pale gleamed beneath the surface. For a moment he thought it was a bone. Then he brushed away the mud. It was porcelain, a doll's head, its eyes missing, hair long gone. But across the cracked forehead, faint letters remained etched in ink. Fenwick. The sheriff's breath caught. He looked toward the black expanse of lake. Rain falling harder now. The lake wasn't finished talking. It was just remembering where it left off. Morning light fell through thin clouds, silver and flat. Stillwater County looked peaceful in that washed-out way small towns do when they're trying to forget. Rachel drove along Fenwick Road, the old gravel path curling through fields gone yellow from drought. Every few miles she passed a sagging barn or an empty mailbox with a name half scraped away by time. The address she was looking for no longer existed, flooded decades earlier, but she wanted to see where the road ended. She parked where the asphalt turned to dirt. Beyond it lay a stretch of cracked earth and the faint shimmer of what had once been shoreline. She took out her recorder. "Fenwick Road, July 14th, she said quietly. tracing the last address linked to Mackenzie Lowell, one of the Stillwater Five. The property was once owned by the Fenwick family, missing since 1973. If the lake swallowed their home, then the town swallowed their story. A breeze carried the smell of dust and algae. Rachel turned toward the hills and saw the silhouette of an old farmhouse, sun-bleached and listing to one side. She approached slowly, camera rolling. The front porch sagged under her weight. Inside, the air was thick with rot and silence. Wallpaper peeled like skin. A calendar still hung in the kitchen, June 1973. She walked through the rooms methodically, filming everything. The bedroom walls were covered in faint childlike drawings, waves, trees, a woman standing beside a dark shape that could have been a lake. Beneath it, a scrawled word. Under. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. A text from Dor. Found something in old archives. Meet me at the station. Bring your camera. She exhaled, a mix of relief and unease, and headed back to her car. At the small county station, Dor was hunched over a microfilm reader in the archive room. Dust hung in beams of fluorescent light. Pulled this from the Gazette archives, he said. June 1973, 2 months before the dam project. He turned the knob, and a grainy newspaper headline appeared. Local family missing. Mother and 2 daughters vanish from farm near Stillwater. Rachel read aloud. Helen Fenwick, 42. Daughters, Alice, 17. And June, 14. Father? Died in a construction accident the year before, Dor said. Worked on the dam project that flooded their land. Rachel frowned. So the husband helped build the thing that buried his own home. Yeah, and after his death, the project manager offered Helen a payout to relocate. She refused. Said the lake was cursed. Who was the project manager? Dor slid another page under the lens. Grant Lowell. Rachel's pen froze. Lowell? As in Mackenzie's father, he finished. Silence thickened between them. The old air vent hummed. So Mackenzie's dad ran the project that flooded the Fenwick property, Rachel said. Then, 24 years later, his daughter disappears near the same site. History doesn't repeat here, Dor murmured. It resurfaces. They sat for a long moment before Rachel spoke again. The Fenwicks disappear in 73. The lake expands in 74. The Stillwater Five vanish in 97. That's a pattern. 23, 24-year cycles. What if this isn't coincidence? Dor rubbed the bridge of his nose. Coincidence or curse, it still needs proof. He opened another file, scanned property blueprints and dam schematics. Look here. He pointed to a dotted line running through the middle of the planned reservoir. They rerouted the pipeline in 73, right before construction. That line runs directly under the lake bed, right where we found the cabin. Rachel leaned in. Meaning the Fenwick property wasn't flooded naturally. It was deliberately erased, Dor nodded grimly. And now it's coming back. Rain tapped faintly against the window. Outside, the sky had turned the color of tin. Rachel pulled out the Polaroid from the cabin, the one showing the blurred woman holding the shotgun. What if that's Helen Fenwick? What if the kid stumbled onto something connected to what happened to her family? Possible, Dor said. But we'll need to confirm the timeline. Maybe a surviving relative could help Rachel check the database on her laptop. No living Fenwicks listed in Stillwater, but, she scrolled further, there's an Alice Fenwick listed under another name, Alice Marin. Lansing address. Born 1956. That makes her 64 now. Dor exhaled slowly. If she's the same Alice. She was 17 when her mother disappeared. Rachel closed the laptop. Then she might be the only one left who knows what really happened. They agreed to drive to Lansing the next morning. That night, back at the motel, Rachel reviewed her footage. The image of the child's drawing from the farmhouse lingered on screen. A woman beside a lake, and beneath the waves, 5 figures. She paused the frame, zooming in on the woman's face. The ink had blurred with age, but there was something in the shape of the eyes. Large, hollow, familiar. She compared it with the blurred woman in the Polaroid. The resemblance was unmistakable. Lightning flickered outside the motel window. For a second, the reflection in the glass looked like the lake's surface. Rachel whispered to herself, "Under." Somewhere across town, Dorr sat alone in his living room, the old cassette of Riders on the Storm playing softly on his tape deck. He stared at the Polaroids on his table, the smiling teens, the firelight, the darkness behind them. The rain outside deepened. From somewhere deep within the hiss of the tape, a new sound surfaced. A faint knock, rhythmic, like water dripping against glass. He turned off the deck. The sound continued. It was coming from his window. When he pulled back the curtain, nothing was there, just the reflection of the lake in his eyes. The drive to Lansing took 3 hours through fields that shimmered under a pewter sky. Rain hung like mist over the highway, blurring the landscape into shades of silver and green. Rachel sat in the passenger seat of the county SUV, laptop balanced on her knees, reviewing notes as Sheriff Dorr drove. The rhythmic thump of the windshield wipers marked time between them. "She's listed as Alice Marin now," Rachel said. "Retired nurse. Lives alone. Assuming she'll talk," Dorr muttered. "She will," Rachel said, though she wasn't sure why she believed it. They arrived at a small single-story house on the outskirts of Lansing. The lawn was neat but empty, as if no one expected visitors. Dorr rang the bell twice. The door opened to reveal a thin woman with white hair pulled into a loose braid. Her eyes were pale, almost translucent, and sharp despite her age. "Yes?" she asked. "Mrs. Marin," Rachel said. "My name is Rachel Lowry. This is Sheriff Dorr, Stillwater County. We'd like to ask you a few questions about your family, about the Fenwicks." The woman's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her gaze. A shadow, quickly buried. "I don't use that name anymore," she said softly. "Come in." The house smelled faintly of lavender and antiseptic. She led them to a small sitting room, where framed photographs lined the mantel. Grandchildren, holiday gatherings, a younger Alice in a nurse's uniform. No sign of her mother or sister. Dorr cleared his throat. "We're reopening an old missing persons case from 1973. We think it might be connected to a more recent one." Alice folded her hands in her lap. "I figured someone would come eventually." "The water never keeps what it takes," Rachel leaned forward. "Can you tell us what happened to your mother and sister?" Alice stared at her teacup for a long moment. "We lived near the lake before the dam went up. My father worked construction. After he died, the county wanted our land for the reservoir. Mother refused to sell, said the ground was sick." "What did she mean by that?" Rachel asked. "She thought something was buried there, before any of us were born. She'd wake up at night saying she heard knocking from under the floorboards. My sister June said it was just water pipes, but I believed her. There was a smell in the house sometimes, metal and rot, like the lake before a storm." Alice's hands trembled as she lifted the teacup. "Then one night June went missing. Just gone. We found her shoes by the barn, prints leading toward the water. The sheriff said she ran away. But Mother said the lake had taken her." Dorr listened quietly, eyes lowered. "What happened next?" Rachel asked. Mother stopped sleeping. She'd walk the shoreline with a lantern, whispering June's name. Then one morning she wasn't there either, just her lantern, still burning by the dock. I left the next day, never went back." Rachel glanced at Dorr. "Did anyone ever find their bodies?" "No," Alice said. "They built the dam that summer. Flooded everything, covered the house, the dock, the trees. Mother used to say that when water takes something, it keeps the reflection." Rachel hesitated. "Do you know a man named Grant Lowell?" Alice looked up sharply. "He was the project manager. He came to the house often. trying to convince Mother to sign the papers. When she refused, he threatened to have her evicted. He said the county couldn't wait for ghosts. Dorr's jaw tightened. Alice continued. After my family disappeared, he came to the farm one last time. I remember because he brought flowers. Told me it was a tragedy of circumstance. But when he left, I saw mud on his shoes. Thick, black, lake mud. He hadn't come from the road. He'd come from the water. The room was silent except for the faint tick of the mantel clock. Rachel's pulse quickened. Mrs. Marin, one of the Stillwater Five, Mackenzie Lowell, was his daughter. Alice set down her cup slowly. Then maybe the lake finally remembered who it owed. Rachel swallowed. Do you think he hurt your family? Alice didn't answer. She reached into a drawer beside her chair and pulled out a faded photograph. It showed 3 people standing by the lake: Helen Fenwick, Alice, and June. Behind them, near the water's edge, was a 4th figure, a man in a dark coat, watching. I took this 2 days before they disappeared, she said. I always thought it was a neighbor. But when I looked at it years later, she handed it to Rachel. The image was grainy, but even through the blur, the face was familiar. Grant Lowell. The drive back to Stillwater was silent. Rain fell steadily now, streaking the windshield with silver threads. Rachel stared out at the gray landscape, the photograph trembling in her hands. It fits, she said finally. Grant Lowell kills Helen Fenwick and her family to clear the land. Then decades later, his daughter and her friends go missing at the same place. Maybe someone found out, or something did, Dorr murmured. She looked at him. You don't believe in curses? No, he said, but I believe in guilt. And this town's full of it. Lightning flashed across the horizon. For a heartbeat, Rachel thought she saw the glint of water where the lake used to be. Shifting, waiting. When they reached Stillwater, Dorr dropped her at the motel. Get some rest, he said. Tomorrow we'll look into Lowell's old records. Rachel nodded. You think he's still alive? Dorr hesitated. Grant Lowell died in 1997. Heart attack. Right after his daughter vanished, Rachel froze. The same year? The same week. He drove off without another word. In her room, Rachel pinned the photo of the Fenwicks beside the Polaroids from the cabin. Lightning illuminated them in staccato flashes. The figures in the background seemed to shift with each flash, their outlines blurring into water. She pressed record. Stillwater County, Day 3. The Fenwick disappearance wasn't a tragedy. It was a cover-up. The man who buried them also buried his own daughter, whether he meant to or not. The question is, who's still digging? Outside, thunder rolled over the dry lake bed, and in the distance, water whispered against the shore that shouldn't have been there. Morning returned to Stillwater with a strange calm. The rain had stopped, but the air felt heavy, as if the clouds were holding their breath. Rachel arrived at the sheriff's office early, carrying her camera gear and a thermos of black coffee. The building, red brick, square, and faded by time, stood at the edge of town like a stubborn relic. Dorr was already inside, leaning over a stack of old county records. He didn't look up when she entered. I pulled every document from the 73 dam expansion. Half of it's missing. Rachel set her bag down. Missing how? Indexed but not filed. References to permit numbers that don't exist. Signatures from officials who never worked here. He slid a sheet toward her. The paper was brittle, the ink faintly blurred. Here's the original environmental report. Signed by Grant Lowell. Now look at the revised version filed 3 weeks later. Rachel compared them. The second report was shorter, cleaner, and 1 paragraph lighter. The section on property displacement, she murmured. They removed the line about the Fenwick residence. Exactly. It's like the family was erased from the county before they even went missing. Dorr rubbed his temple. Someone went through a lot of trouble to clean this up. Rachel scrolled through the county's digital archives on her laptop. Who had access to the records after the flood? He thought for a moment. The water board, the county clerk, and the maintenance department that handled the reservoir upkeep. She froze. Maintenance department? He nodded. Run for years by the same family. Vance Rachel blinked. As in Elena Vance? Dorr nodded slowly. Her brother worked maintenance before her. Their father before him. The Vances have been caretakers of that lake since before it had a name, Rachel typed furiously. Then they'd have access to the pipelines, the maintenance tunnels, the floodgates, every part of the infrastructure that's technically off limits. He leaned closer. You think one of them's involved? I think they know more than anyone else. Outside, the sky darkened again. A storm building or the last one circling back. It was hard to tell. Rachel packed her camera. I'll talk to Elena. Dorr stood. You shouldn't go alone. Then come with me. They drove past the shuttered mill, the feed store, and the lone diner where conversation always stopped when strangers walked in. The Vance house sat near the old water plant. A white structure with a sagging porch and a wind chime made from old copper pipes. Elena Vance met them at the door. She was in her late 60s, small, wiry, and sunburned, her eyes sharp as the edge of a blade. Sheriff, she said, though she didn't sound pleased to see him. Haven't had lawmen on my porch since the last flood inspection. Miss Vance, Dorr said politely. We're looking into historical records on the dam. We think some files were altered. Her mouth twitched. Wouldn't surprise me. County's been losing papers since the day they started keeping them. Rachel stepped forward. Do you remember the Fenwicks? Elena's eyes flickered. Everybody remembers that name, but remembering don't mean talking. Rachel held out the Polaroid of the cabin. We found this under the lake. Elena took the photo, squinting at it. For a moment her expression softened, then tightened again. You shouldn't have gone digging there. Why? Rachel asked. Because that land don't like being disturbed. The wind picked up, rattling the chimes. Miss Vance, Dorr said gently, we're trying to understand what happened to those kids in '97. You were working maintenance then, weren't you? I was, she said, and I remember the night clear as glass. Snow so thick you could hear it fall. I was at the control station monitoring water levels when the sheriff called in about the missing truck. Thought it was just another winter accident. Rachel studied her. Did you see anything that night? Elena hesitated, looking toward the lake beyond the trees. Lights, she said finally. Under the ice. Thought it was headlights at first, but they moved wrong, slow, like something swimming. Rachel and Dorr exchanged glances. Did you report it? Told your deputy, Elena said. He told me to get some sleep. Rachel's camera was running quietly in her bag, recording every word. Elena handed back the photo. You want my advice, Miss Lowry? Leave the past alone. That lake's full of more than water. It's got memory, and memory don't stay buried. They thanked her and left, though Rachel could feel the woman's gaze on them until they reached the car. Inside, the air felt thick, like the pressure before a storm. She's hiding something, Rachel said. Probably, Dorr replied. But it's hard to tell where superstition ends and guilt begins in this town. They drove in silence for a while, the lake shimmering in the distance. Rachel broke the quiet. If the Vances maintained the dam, they'd have access to restricted tunnels, right? Maintenance corridors under the lake bed? Dorr nodded reluctantly. Yeah. Concrete conduits, service rooms, pump stations, all sealed after the expansion. Could a person survive down there? He glanced at her. What are you thinking? What if the Fenwicks didn't drown? What if someone used those tunnels to hide something? Or someone? He said nothing, but his hands tightened on the steering wheel. They reached the station just as thunder cracked overhead. The lights flickered once, then steadied. Dorr went to check the generator while Rachel returned to the archive room. She wanted to scan the Fenwick property files again, but when she opened the drawer where the files had been, the folders were gone. Every one of them. In their place was a single envelope. No label. Just her name, written in shaky handwriting. Rachel opened it carefully. Inside were 5 photographs. Each was a Polaroid, fresh, not aged. Each showed the same thing, the lake under moonlight, from different angles. In the last one, a figure stood at the water's edge, facing away from the camera. Rachel's own silhouette. The storm hit just before dusk, turning still water into a blur of gray and silver. Rain fell in thin sheets, and lightning crawled over the lake like restless fingers. Rachel sat in her car outside the sheriff's office, staring at the Polaroids. The last image, the one of her standing by the lake, wouldn't leave her mind. She hadn't been there since the day before. Someone had taken that photo last night. She carried the envelope inside, water dripping from her coat. Dorr was by the radio, arguing with a deputy about washed-out back roads. "Sheriff," she said, "I found these in the archives." He took the photos, his brow furrowing. "Someone's playing games, or leaving warnings. Doesn't matter which," he said. "Whoever took these has access to the station." Rachel hesitated. "What if it's the Vances?" "Maybe," Dorr said. "Or someone else with keys that shouldn't still work." Lightning flashed, momentarily filling the office with white light. When it faded, Dorr handed her a flashlight. "You wanted to see those tunnels under the dam? Now's the time. The storm will keep everyone home." Rachel blinked. "You're serious?" He grabbed his raincoat. "You wanted answers." "They're not up here." The dam was a mile out of town, a concrete monolith rising from the shrinking lake. The maintenance entrance was half hidden behind a chain-link fence and a cluster of cattails that trembled in the wind. Dorr pried open the old gate. "I shouldn't know where the key is," he muttered. "But some things you don't forget." Inside, the air was colder, metallic. The flashlight beam cut through the darkness, revealing a narrow corridor lined with rusting pipes and dripping condensation. The floor sloped downward, slick with algae. Rachel filmed as they walked, her voice low. Stillwater Dam, July 15th. Entering the maintenance tunnels first constructed during the 1973 expansion. If these records were erased, this is where the truth was buried. Dorr said nothing, his jaw set. They passed faded warning signs. Authorized personnel only, water level control, danger, pressure valve. The deeper they went, the quieter it became. The storm outside faded into a distant heartbeat, replaced by the echo of dripping water. "Where do these lead?" Rachel whispered. "Beneath the reservoir," Dorr said. "Back when the lake was higher, this was the control system. Most of it was sealed after the expansion. After 20 minutes, the corridor opened into a large chamber. A rusted ladder climbed up one wall, disappearing into a shaft of darkness. On the far side, a steel door hung half open, its hinges corroded. "Looks like someone's been here," Rachel said. They approached slowly. Dorr pushed the door open. Inside was a smaller room, an old control station. Dust coated everything except one section of wall, where finger marks streaked through the grime. Rachel aimed her flashlight. There were names carved into the concrete. Aaron, Clara, Jonah, Matt, Kenzie. Beneath them, one more name. June Fenwick. Dorr exhaled. "Dear God." Rachel stepped closer. The carvings were shallow but deliberate. Whoever made these was alive when they did. Lightning flashed somewhere above, and for an instant, the light flickered through the cracks in the concrete. Then she saw it. Something glinting in the corner. She knelt and brushed away the dust. It was a metal bracelet, corroded but intact. The name engraved on it was almost gone, but under her light she could still read the letters, CR. "Clara Riggs," Rachel said softly. Dorr stared at the bracelet, his voice gravel-thin. "We searched for weeks, not one trace of them. How did this survive down here? Because no one was looking in the right place." The flashlight beam swept across the walls. Old control panels, fuse boxes, and a set of stairs descending into black water. Rachel pointed the camera down, recording the reflection. For a moment, it looked like faces staring back up. The water rippled. "Sheriff," she said quietly, "did you see that?" He aimed his light. "Fish! Has to be. There's no fish this deep." Something moved again just below the surface. Slow, deliberate. Dor gripped her shoulder. "We're leaving." Now, but Rachel didn't move. Her gaze locked on the far wall. There, half hidden under moss, was a rusted sign. Fenwick Access 02. "This isn't just a tunnel," she whispered. "It's built over the Fenwick property line." Dor's face tightened. "We shouldn't be here." As they turned to leave, the steel door slammed shut behind them with a metallic crash. The echo rolled through the tunnel like thunder. Rachel's flashlight flickered. "Was that the wind?" "No," Dor said. "That was a lock." They pushed at the door, but it wouldn't budge. The air grew heavy, damp. Water dripped faster from the ceiling, pooling at their feet. Rachel's pulse hammered. "There's another exit, right?" "Should be," Dor said, but his voice had lost conviction. He swung his light around, searching. Then the flashlight beam caught something on the opposite wall. A small alcove filled with boxes wrapped in plastic. Rachel ripped one open. Inside were files, hundreds of them. County records, blueprints, and missing persons reports. The top one was dated February 1997. "It's all here," she breathed. "Every erased record." Dor flipped through them quickly. "These are originals." God, they hid them down here, another flash of light from above. The floor trembled. A deep, resonant creak rolled through the walls. "The storm," Dor muttered. "Pressure shift. We need to get out before—" The sound that followed wasn't thunder. It was something collapsing. A section of ceiling cracked, spilling water like blood from a wound. Rachel clutched her camera, heart racing. "Sheriff!" He grabbed her arm, pulling her toward the ladder. "Go!" They climbed as the tunnel flooded, the water rising fast. The light flickered out. In the darkness, Rachel heard the whisper of something moving below, something too slow, too deliberate to be current. They reached the hatch at the top and shoved it open, emerging into the storm. Rain hammered the dam's surface, cold and sharp. Rachel collapsed against the concrete, gasping. Dor pulled himself up beside her, drenched and pale. Behind them, the hatch shuddered, water pushing against it from below. Rachel stared into the rain. Someone built that room to hide the truth. Dor nodded weakly, and maybe something else to keep it from escaping. The hatch rattled once, then went still. By morning, the storm had passed. The air smelled of mud and metal, the way it does after something's broken open. Rachel sat cross-legged on the motel floor, laptop open, hair still damp from the night before. Her camera had survived the flood. Miraculously, so had the footage. On the screen, the tunnel glowed in the beam of her flashlight. Walls carved with names, the flooded stairs, the reflection that looked like faces. She watched it again and again, the way survivors replay crashes, hunting for the second where everything changed. Dor had gone home to rest, though she doubted he'd sleep. She uploaded the video to a private cloud for safekeeping. Habit. Insurance. Then she cued a short teaser clip for her podcast channel. Just a 30-second montage of the lake, the tunnel, and her voice over the images. 23 years ago, 5 teenagers vanished. We were told they fell through ice, but ice doesn't carve names in concrete. She scheduled it to go live that evening. By noon, the sheriff's phone rang. By 3 p.m., the clip had 200,000 views. When Rachel arrived at the sheriff's office, Dor looked up from behind his desk, jaw tight. "You didn't tell me you were posting it." "I had to," she said. "If we disappear, the story doesn't." "You might have just made yourself the story." He turned his monitor so she could see the news feed. A local station had already picked it up. Mystery Tunnel Under Stillwater Dam. Podcast host claims cover-up. "I wanted attention on the evidence," she said, but her voice was thin. Dorr sighed. "Attention's not what this town handles well." The phone rang again. Deputies, reporters, state investigators. Each call tightened the knot in his shoulders. "State's sending a team to inspect the dam. They're already talking sinkholes and liability. You might have just triggered an evacuation order. Then maybe they'll find what we did." That's what I'm afraid of. By dusk, Stillwater looked uneasy, like a place remembering it had something to hide. The diner stayed open late. The conversations inside stopped when Rachel entered. People watched her like she'd brought the ghosts back on purpose. A woman at the counter whispered to another, "They'll blame the sheriff next." Rachel left her food untouched. Outside, the sky glowed orange with the last of the sun. She walked toward the lake, her recorder in hand. The shoreline looked different now. Water lower, mud cracked into patterns like veins. She spoke quietly into the mic. "The footage is out. The lake's finally talking, but it sounds like fear." A figure appeared in her peripheral vision, Dorr, hands in pockets, watching the water. He looked older than he had yesterday. "They're closing the tunnels tomorrow," he said. "State engineers, hazmat suits, the works." "You told them everything." "Enough?" "Then it's over." He shook his head. "You don't close something like this. You just cover it again." He handed her an envelope. Inside were photographs, black and white prints from the county archives. "Found these in the boxes we pulled from the tunnel." Look at the date, June 1973. The photos showed men in hard hats beside the half-built dam. In the corner of one image, two women stood apart from the workers, Helen and Alice Fenwick. Between them, barely visible, was a small concrete hatch, the same kind Rachel had climbed out of last night. "They were standing over the tunnel entrance," she whispered. "Before it was sealed," Dorr said. Lightning flickered on the horizon again, dry and distant. Rachel looked toward the lake. If the Fenwicks were buried down there, the water would have preserved the remains. He nodded. "If the state team finds them, we'll finally have names to bury." That night, Rachel couldn't sleep. The motel walls felt too thin, the air too still. Around midnight, she heard a car outside, an engine idling, then cutting off. She peeked through the curtain. A truck sat under the streetlight. Empty. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "You shouldn't have shown them." She froze, fingers trembling. A second message followed. "The lake takes back what it gives." She dialed Dorr, but it went straight to voicemail. Then came the knock. 3 slow raps against the door. Rachel grabbed her recorder, whispered, "Stillwater County, July 16th. Motel room 3. Someone's here." She opened the door a crack. The hallway was empty except for a small envelope on the ground. Inside was a single Polaroid. Her video thumbnail. Her own face frozen mid-sentence, mouth open, eyes wide. On the back, written in marker, "Stop digging." At dawn, she drove straight to Dorr's house. His truck was gone. The front door was unlocked. Inside, the living room looked untouched except for the cassette deck on the table, Riders on the Storm playing low, looping. On the couch sat another envelope. Her name again. Inside, a map of Stillwater Lake, dated 1974. Several locations circled in red, each marked pipe access. The last circle was on the far western edge labeled Intake 5. Fenwick Line. She called the sheriff's number again. No answer. Then faintly, through the cassette hiss, she heard knocking. Not from outside. From the floor. She froze, staring at the boards beneath the rug. The knocking came again, slow, deliberate, rhythmic. For a long moment she didn't move. Then she bent down, pressed her ear to the floorboards. Water, moving beneath the house. She whispered to no one. He built his home over the old line. The song looped again, Jim Morrison's voice fading into thunder. Into this house we're born. Into this world we're thrown. Rachel stood slowly, her pulse hammering. "Door," she whispered. Then the knocking stopped, and from somewhere deep below, the lake answered back. By noon, the sheriff's truck was found abandoned at the edge of the lake. The deputies said it must have been the rain, the mud too soft, the wheels sunk. But Rachel knew better. The passenger door was open, and on the seat lay Door's badge, slick with water, as though it had been placed there with care. She stood beside the truck, microphone trembling in her hand. July 17th. Sheriff Calvin Door, missing. His vehicle recovered at Stillwater Lake, Western Shore. Last known location, Fenwick Line. Behind her, the lake stretched out, half empty, half awake. The drought had pulled its skin back, revealing the dark ribs of the old structures beneath. What was once shoreline was now an expanse of cracked mud and pale reeds. Somewhere beneath that, the intake tunnel waited, the one marked on Door's map. Rachel zipped her jacket and started walking. The wind off the lake smelled metallic, like old blood. She found the hatch easily this time, a rusted disc of iron half buried in silt. The warning letters were faded, but she could still make them out. Intake 5. Authorized access only. She hesitated, then turned on her headlamp and twisted the wheel latch. It resisted, then gave with a groan that echoed into the earth. Cold air surged up, damp and heavy. She descended. The ladder rattled beneath her boots. The deeper she went, the colder it grew, until her breath came out in pale ribbons. The tunnel below was narrow, circular, its walls sweating condensation. A low hum filled the space, a mechanical vibration, like a heartbeat. She switched on her recorder. Fenwick Line, Intake 5. Tunnel runs below the western ridge. Sheriff Door's truck found 300 yards from here. Her voice sounded foreign, swallowed by the walls. She moved slowly, the light from her lamp gliding over corroded pipes and faded stencil markings. 1973 expansion project, property control, Lowell Engineering. She stopped at that one, fingertips tracing the letters. Grant Lowell, she whispered. He built the intake line. The tunnel turned sharply, narrowing until she had to crouch. Water trickled along the floor, pooling in places like thin veins of mercury. Every sound echoed endlessly. Her breath, her steps, her pulse. She rounded another bend, and her light fell on something lying in the water. A flashlight. Doors. She picked it up, still damp, still warm. Sheriff? Her voice cracked, swallowed instantly by the tunnel. No answer, just the faint drip of water and the slow pulse of machinery in the distance. She pushed forward. The tunnel widened again into a chamber, the air suddenly colder, the smell stronger. Rust, mold, and something sweet, almost floral. Her light swept across the room and caught on movement, fabric drifting in the shallow water. It was a jacket, sheriff's issue. Empty. Rachel's breath hitched. She stepped closer, careful, scanning the room. That was when she saw the wall. Like the one in the other tunnel, it was carved with names. Older ones this time, some barely legible beneath layers of mineral stain. Helen, June, Aaron, Clara, Jonah, Matt, Kenzie. And now, Calvin. The last name was still wet. Rachel stumbled backward, nearly dropping her recorder. Her lamp flickered, then steadied. Something rippled the water behind her, small waves spreading outward, too deliberate for current. She spun, light shaking. The chamber was empty. Her breathing quickened. Door, if you can hear me. A voice cut her off, faint, distorted, through the recorder's speaker. Leave. Before. She froze. It was his voice. Doors. Not in real time, echoing from her own device, as if the tunnel itself were playing it back. Sheriff, she whispered. Static answered. Then, layered beneath it, the same rhythmic knock she'd heard in his house. 3 beats. Pause. 3 beats. Slower this time, deeper, like the sound came through a wall of water. Her flashlight dimmed. She smacked it against her palm. The beam steadied. That's when she noticed it. The far wall wasn't concrete. It was wood, old and swollen with moisture, and in its center, a door frame. Carved into the frame, barely visible. Fenwick. Her heart pounded. She stepped closer. The air tasted wrong now, thick, briny, electric. She reached out, pressed her hand against the door. It was warm. She pulled. The wood shifted, releasing a sigh of cold air that smelled like rot and iron. Behind it, her light found stairs descending into black water. "Stillwater County?" she whispered into the mic, her voice shaking. This structure predates the dam. It's wooden. It's..." The recording cut out as her foot slipped on the slick step. She caught herself against the frame, breathing hard. Somewhere below, the water rippled. She aimed her flashlight down. For a heartbeat, she thought she saw faces, pale shapes suspended just beneath the surface. Then the light flickered again, and they were gone. She backed up, fast, chest tight. The recorder was still rolling, though she barely realized it. Leaving intake 5, no sign of Sheriff Dorr, structural collapse likely imminent. She climbed the ladder, each rung slick, her pulse a drumbeat in her ears. When she reached the hatch, the light from outside was different, orange, low. Evening already. She pushed it open, stumbled into the fading sun. The lake was lower than before. The drought had deepened. The water had retreated another 10 feet, exposing stumps and stones that hadn't seen daylight in decades. Rachel collapsed on the ground, gasping, mud clinging to her hands. She pulled out her recorder, checking the playback. It was still running, but now there was sound behind her voice. Faint, wet, knocking. 3 slow beats. She turned toward the hatch. It was closed again, and from beneath it, water began to seep up through the cracks, slow, steady, deliberate. By dawn, the drought had broken. Thunder rolled somewhere beyond the horizon, but the sky above Stillwater stayed an uneasy gray, neither rain nor sun, only waiting. Rachel parked outside the temporary command post the state had set up by the dam. White tents, yellow tape, the hum of generators. Men in hard hats carried waterproof cases past her without looking up. The lake looked smaller again, its skin drawn tight. She walked straight to the lead investigator, a tall woman in a windbreaker that read, "Michigan Emergency Response." "Rachel Lowry, journalist," she said. "I have footage from inside the intake tunnels. It shows structural damage and evidence of a crime." The investigator raised a brow. "You're the podcaster?" "Yes." "You're not cleared for this site." Rachel held out her recorder. "You'll want to hear what's on this." The woman hesitated, then nodded to a technician. They led Rachel inside one of the tents. A monitor flickered to life as her footage played. The carvings, the bracelet, the Fenwick door, the water rising. The investigator's face stayed unreadable until the knocking began. "That sound," the technician murmured. "It's rhythmic." "Pressure fluctuation?" the investigator offered. "No," Rachel said quietly. "It's deliberate." They replayed the final seconds. The 3 knocks, the pause, then water seeping through the frame. "Where exactly did you find this?" Rachel pointed to the map pinned on the wall. "Intake 5, Western Line. The hatch is still accessible." The investigator studied her. "You're lucky to be alive. Those tunnels were condemned after the expansion. We'll send a team down. I'm going with you." "That's not going to happen." Rachel met her eyes. "You don't even know what you're looking for." "I do." A long pause, then, "Fine. But you stay behind the safety line. One wrong step and the whole place will come down by mid-afternoon." The team descended. Rachel stood at the mouth of the intake tunnel, helmet light slicing through the gloom. Cables snaked down into the dark. Voices echoed up, distorted by the walls. The radio crackled. Entering secondary chamber. Structural integrity holding another voice. Followed, lower. You'll want to see this. The investigator motioned for Rachel to follow partway down. They stopped at the first junction. The air was damp and cold, alive with the smell of algae and metal. Through the open channel below, she saw the chamber she'd filmed, but drained now, pumps clearing the water to knee-deep sludge. The names on the walls glistened under floodlights. Human, one technician said, carved with a knife. Old. Then he pointed toward the far end. We found a false wall. The investigator gave the order, and 2 workers set to work with crowbars. The concrete crumbled easily. Behind it was a cavity no bigger than a small room. Rachel climbed down, her boots sinking into the muck. The light caught something pale in the corner, a shape that didn't belong to the architecture. Bones, several sets, half buried, half preserved by the water. A tangle of ribs, fabric, hair turned to silt. The investigator's breath left her in a sharp exhale. Get the forensic team down here. Rachel knelt beside the nearest shape. Around one wrist was a corroded chain bracelet engraved with letters dulled by time. She brushed them gently until they shone enough to read. H.F. Helen Fenwick. She swallowed hard. It's them. One technician shone his light higher. More shapes lined the wall, smaller, teen-sized. The investigator whispered, "How long could they have been down here?" Rachel's voice shook. Since before the lake. A silence settled that wasn't emptiness, but weight. Decades of it. Then a second radio crackled from above. "Ma'am, water pressure's spiking. You need to clear the line." The investigator barked orders. "Seal the chamber. Everyone out." Rachel lingered 1 second too long, staring at the wall. Something about the mud looked wrong, like handwriting hidden beneath the grime. She wiped with her glove until letters emerged, scrawled in hurried lines. "He built over us." Water surged at her knees. A technician grabbed her arm, pulling her toward the ladder. The radio screamed static. "Shut the gate, now!" They reached the hatch as the first torrent burst through the cracked wall, brown and cold and heavy with the smell of deep earth. Above ground, Rachel collapsed onto the gravel, coughing water and mud. The hatch sealed below her with a metallic clang. The investigator crouched beside her. "They're gone." The structure collapsed. "We can't send anyone else down." Rachel stared at the lake. The surface had begun to churn, small whirlpools forming near the western ridge where the intake lay buried. "They're not gone," she whispered. "They've been here all along." That evening, the official press release went out. Human remains discovered in Stillwater Dam tunnels. Investigation ongoing. No comment on identities. The town turned silent again, like it always did when truth brushed too close. Rachel returned to her motel, exhausted. Her recorder sat on the nightstand, still running. She rewound the tape to test the audio. Her own voice played first, shaky and distant. Then came the sound from the chamber, the rush of water, the collapse, the static. And beneath it, faint but clear, a new sound, a man's voice. "Rachel, leave." She froze. It was Dorr. "Sheriff?" she whispered to the empty room. The tape continued, the voice breaking into static, then returning. Softer. "It's not done yet." The recorder clicked off on its own. Rachel sat motionless for a long time, staring at the reflection of the lake in the motel window. The air smelled faintly of rain again. She whispered into the dark. "Then neither am I." Outside, thunder rolled once, low, patient, almost like a reply. The next morning, the town of Stillwater woke to find itself famous for all the wrong reasons. Helicopters thudded overhead, satellite vans lined the main road, and news anchors in raincoats delivered words like breakthrough, mass grave, and long-buried secrets. Rachel watched from the motel window. The media had arrived like scavengers, but she couldn't bring herself to hate them. She had been one of them once, hungry for the next mystery, blind to the toll. Her phone buzzed endlessly. Messages from journalists, podcast fans, even the families of the missing. Most were congratulations, some were threats. One simply read, "You've woken it up." She ignored them all. At noon, the state coroner held a press conference under a tent beside the dam. Rachel stood behind the barricade with the crowd, notebook trembling in her hands. The coroner's voice carried over the wind. Preliminary findings confirmed the remains recovered from intake 5 belong to multiple individuals. Based on dental and genetic data, we have positively identified 3 of the Stillwater 5, Clara Riggs, Jonah Thorne, and Matthew Thorne. Gasps rippled through the onlookers. Additionally, the coroner continued, we have confirmed the presence of remains consistent with Helen Fenwick, missing since 1973. The investigation is ongoing regarding 2 unidentified sets of remains. Rachel's pen froze. 2? One should have been Kenzie Lowell. The other, Door. But when the coroner took questions, he added something that turned the crowd's murmurs into stunned silence. One recovered skeleton is male, estimated age late 60s. The death occurred decades earlier than the others. The crowd erupted. Questions shouted, cameras flashing. Rachel's pulse hammered. Late 60s, decades earlier, Grant Lowell. Back at the command tent, she cornered the lead investigator. You found him, didn't you? Grant Lowell. The woman exhaled through her nose. Off the record, yes, the bone structure matches. DNA pending, but we're not expecting surprises. Was he buried with the others? Same chamber, different layer. Beneath them, Rachel's voice trembled. Someone put his body there before the teens ever disappeared. Or he put himself there, the investigator said grimly. But the positioning, it looked almost ceremonial. Hands folded, tools arranged beside him. What kind of tools? The investigator hesitated. Survey equipment. From the original dam construction. His name's engraved on one of the levels. Rachel felt the floor tilt under her feet. He built the tunnels. He built his own grave. The investigator gave a tight nod. Seems that way. That night, Rachel sat by the lake again, the wind off the water carrying a faint scent of iron and silt. The floodlights from the dig site cast long, trembling reflections across the surface. She pressed record on her mic. Stillwater County, July 18th. The remains found in the Fenwick chamber confirm what this town refused to face. The builder of the dam, the man who erased the Fenwicks, lies beneath his own creation. His daughter vanished above it. And now the lake is shrinking, as if it's finally ready to show everything it's swallowed. She stopped, listening to the night. Somewhere, a frog croaked. Then another sound, softer, knocking. 3 slow beats, echoing from beneath the dock. She swallowed hard. Door, she whispered. The knocking stopped. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She hesitated, then answered. Rachel. The voice was weak, waterlogged, but unmistakable. Sheriff? Where are you? Not far, he said. Static crackled over his words. They weren't supposed to find me. What are you talking about? We found the chamber. You need to leave, he interrupted. The lake's not done. Door. The line went dead. She stared at the screen, her reflection ghostly against the dark water. At dawn, she drove to the excavation site. The workers had left, the area sealed off overnight. But the fencing was flimsy, and Rachel had never been good at following orders. She slipped inside. The hatch to intake 5 was half buried now, silt and broken rebar surrounding the metal plate. But beside it was something new, a fresh footprint, deep and solitary. She crouched. The tread pattern was familiar. Sheriff's boots. Rachel's breath caught. Door, she whispered again. A low sound rose from the hatch, like air moving through a hollow throat. Then a faint trickle of water began to seep through the cracks again. She stepped back, heart pounding. No, not again. The trickle became a steady stream. The ground trembled. Rachel turned to run, but a glint caught her eye, something half buried in the mud. She knelt, pulling it free. A badge, Door's badge, the same one she'd seen on the seat of his truck, except this one was clean, still warm. She dropped it, backing away. The stream turned to a gush. The hatch lifted slightly, water bursting through in a frothy surge. Rachel stumbled up the slope, mud clinging to her boots. The lake's surface boiled for a moment, then went eerily still. By the time she reached her car, the sun was rising. The lake glimmered gold, peaceful again. She sat behind the wheel, shaking, recorder still running. Stillwater County, July 19th. The lake is changing again. I don't think this is over. Sheriff Dorr may still be down there, or something wearing his voice. She looked back toward the water. For a brief moment, she swore she saw movement. A single ripple moving against the wind, tracing a circle around the center of the lake. Inside the circle, the water was darker, deeper, almost black. That evening, the news broke again. Authorities confirm dam integrity unstable. Stillwater Reservoir to be drained. Rachel sat at her motel desk, typing her episode notes by candlelight as thunder grumbled far off. The last line she wrote before closing her laptop. If the water drains, maybe the truth will finally surface. But I'm not sure anyone in Stillwater wants to see what's left underneath. She turned off the recorder. Then came the knock. 3 slow beats, this time from the window. When she looked up, the glass was fogged from the outside, and traced into the condensation was a single word. Under. The water began falling at dawn. By late afternoon, a staged drawdown had lowered Stillwater Lake to broad mud flats. State crews worked behind a temporary cofferdam at Intake 5, pumps chewing at the silt, until the subgrade slumped and the lake shouldered its way back in. Television crews arrived by the dozens. The governor promised closure. The locals called it tempting fate. Rachel stood at the edge of the old shoreline, microphone in hand, eyes fixed on the receding water. The smell was unbearable. Mud, rust, rot. A whole generation's worth of secrets exposed to the light. She whispered into the recorder. July 21st. The reservoir is nearly dry. The bottom looks like another world. Houses, trees, the old Fenwick farmhouse. Everything they said was gone. Her voice broke. I can see the roof of the cabin. She climbed down the embankment, careful to avoid the slick spots where the mud still moved under its own weight. Drones buzzed overhead, recording the resurrection of a drowned town. When she reached what had once been the lake's center, she stopped. The cabin she'd discovered months earlier was now fully visible. Its roof caved in, walls split open, door hanging like a broken jaw. And beside it, something new, a human silhouette lying half-submerged, one arm stretched toward the doorway. Rachel's knees hit the mud before she realized she'd fallen. The face was barely recognizable, but the sheriff's badge pinned to the torn jacket gleamed in the sun. Door. She pressed the recorder close. Body found near Intake 5. Sheriff Calvin Dorr. Appears recently deceased. Her hand shook as she brushed mud from his face. His eyes were open. She thought she saw recognition there, but the sun played tricks in the glare. His lips moved. She leaned closer, convinced for a moment that he was whispering. But when the wind died, the sound was only air hissing through a crack in the collapsed tunnel below. Then, from inside the cabin, came the noise. 3 knocks. Rachel froze. It couldn't be. There was no one left to make that sound. The knocks came again, slower this time, from under the floor. Her breath fogged in the heat. She stepped inside. The air was thick and wet, the boards soft under her boots. Stillwater County, she whispered, voice trembling. This cabin, this is where it started. Lightning flashed somewhere far off, though the sky was clear. She knelt and pressed her hand to the warped floorboards. The wood was warm. Knock, knock, knock. Rachel drew her knife, pried at the boards until one came loose with a wet crack. Beneath it, darkness and the faint shimmer of water. Something pale floated just below the surface. A hand. Her breath caught. She reached down, fingers brushing skin that was too cold, too soft. She pulled, and the body rose through the hole like a dream surfacing from deep sleep. It was a woman, young, her hair fanned out like dark smoke. Around her neck was a silver locket. Inside it, engraved initials, M. L. Mackenzie Lowell. Rachel's tears blurred the scene. "You're here," she whispered. "All this time." But as she stared, something about Mackenzie's face changed in the shifting light. For an instant, she thought the eyes moved. Then the whole cabin groaned. The ground trembled beneath her. A fissure split open in the mud outside, stretching toward the drained lake bed. Water gushed up from below, black and cold, filling the cracks faster than it should have. Rachel stumbled to her feet, clutching the recorder. The cabin was sinking, the mud swallowing it piece by piece. She ran, the water chasing her ankles. Behind her, the cabin collapsed inward, disappearing into the churn. The sound it made wasn't like wood breaking, it was like a voice, deep and guttural, exhaling after years underwater. By the time she reached solid ground, the cabin was gone again, buried under the returning tide. The floodgates had failed. Rachel looked up the embankment. The engineers were shouting, scrambling to close the valves, but the water didn't care. It surged back in waves, refilling the basin like a beast reclaiming its nest. She turned the recorder on one last time. This isn't a curse. It's memory. Still water doesn't drown what it loves. It keeps it. The rising tide lapped at her boots. The Fenwicks, the Lowell girl, the sheriff. Maybe they were never lost. Maybe the lake just wanted them home. She backed away as the water reached her knees, then her waist. The air was cold now, the storm breaking overhead in white sheets. Her recorder slipped from her hand, vanishing beneath the surface. The last thing it captured was her voice, faint and steady. "If anyone hears this, don't rebuild here. Let it rest." Then the feed cut out. 2 days later, helicopters filmed the aftermath. The dam still standing. The lake refilled. The town quiet. Authorities recovered no additional bodies. No one saw Rachel Lowry leave Stillwater County. But locals said they sometimes hear her voice at night, when the wind's right and the rain comes in sideways. 3 soft knocks. A pause, then her whisper, barely above the water's sigh. Stillwater County, signing off January. 6 months after the flood that remade Stillwater County. The lake had frozen again. Smooth and colorless, it stretched under the low winter sun like glass pulled tight over an open wound. The reporters had gone. The engineers had sealed the intake tunnels in reinforced concrete. The town had learned to pretend the water was only water again. But sometimes, when the wind came from the north, people swore they could smell rot and lavender. The same scent the Fenwicks were said to burn in their lanterns on the last night they were alive. No one fished anymore. The bait shop was boarded shut. Except for one man. He was new to town, a drifter named Owen, working odd construction jobs along the county line. He rented the old Miller cabin, the one that faced the lake, the one locals said was too close to where the ground was weak. On his second morning, he took a walk down to the shoreline. The ice was thick, clouded with bubbles trapped like tiny ghosts. Something glinted near the edge, half buried in frost. He crouched. It was a small black recorder, water damaged but intact. He wiped it clean with his sleeve. The label on the back had almost faded, but he could still make out 3 letters written in pen, RL. He pressed play. Static. Then a woman's voice, soft but clear. Stillwater County. The water was still warm when she disappeared. Owen froze. The sound was so vivid it seemed to come from the air around him rather than the device in his hand. He turned in a slow circle. The lake was silent. The town behind him lay motionless, smoke rising from a few chimneys like pale ribbons. He played the rest. If anyone hears this, don't rebuild here, let it rest. Then 3 faint knocks, and silence. He stared at the recorder for a long time. Then, with the clumsy logic of someone who doesn't believe in curses, but doesn't quite doubt them either, he placed it back where he'd found it, and covered it with snow. By evening, the weather changed. Snow thickened, wind carving invisible shapes across the frozen surface. Inside the Miller cabin, Owen lit the old fireplace and unpacked a single box of belongings: tools, canned food, a radio. He set the radio on the sill, tuning until the static softened into a faint signal. A local broadcast station. Weak, distant. "This is County FM," a voice said. "Tonight, in memory of those lost in Stillwater's flood, we're replaying excerpts from investigative journalist Rachel Lowry's final podcast series." The fire cracked. Owen froze again. 23 years ago, 5 teenagers vanished. We were told they fell through ice. But ice doesn't carve names in concrete. The voice filled the room, calm, certain, haunted. He turned down the dial. The signal didn't fade. He turned it off completely. The voice kept going. "The water doesn't take. It keeps." It remembers Owen stood, heart pounding. The radio wasn't plugged in anymore. He backed toward the door, fumbling for his coat. But before he could reach it, something creaked outside. The sound of ice shifting under weight. He peered through the window. Far out on the frozen lake, where no one had walked in months, a faint light moved slowly along the ice. Not bright, just enough to make the reflection waver, like a lantern. It stopped halfway across the lake, as though whoever carried it had turned to face him. Owen's breath fogged the glass. Then, just barely, he heard it, muffled by wind, but unmistakable. Knock, knock, knock. He stepped back from the window. The light went out, and somewhere deep under the frozen lake, the ice made a sound that wasn't cracking but sighing, like something old turning in its sleep. Weeks later, spring thaw came early. Hikers found the recorder again when the ice broke, a mile from shore this time, lying in silt that had once been the Fenwick field. When they played it, it didn't start with Rachel Lowry's final message. It started with new audio, recent, raw, a man's voice. "This is Owen Miller, Stillwater County, found this by the lake. If anyone hears me." Then the recording ended abruptly, replaced by the sound of rushing water and faintly, laughter. The laughter wasn't cruel or mocking. It was the kind of sound people make when they're finally free of something heavy. By summer, Stillwater Lake was full again. The surface shimmered peacefully, the past once more buried beneath reflection. Children played on the shore. Fishermen returned. And every evening, as the sun set, the water caught the light just right, making it look as if someone were walking far beneath the surface, lantern in hand, following the same endless path between what's remembered and what's gone. Locals didn't talk about it, but they never rebuilt the old Fenwick Road. And when the wind blew across the lake at night, it carried a whisper too soft to record, too steady to ignore. Stillwater County, signing off.